She was sent to observe. No rifle, no combat authority, just a camera, a tripod, and orders to stay behind the line. When the ambush hit, no one expected help from her position on the ridge. Communications were down. Visibility was fading. 6 lives were seconds from ending. Then she lifted the M4, and everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The mountains didn't make noise unless something was wrong. That was one of the first things Rachel learned during cold weather field training. Listen for silence, and measure it against your breathing. This morning, the wind moved low and steady through the pine ridges, pushing faint currents of snow through the half-frozen gravel near the tents. Nothing was wrong yet, but the air still held its edge. Rachel stood near the back of the gear line, one boot on the corner of her sealed hard case. Her camera was already secured inside, packed in foam alongside backup drives, lens filters, and 2 weatherproof batteries. Her tripod was strapped outside the case, legs folded tight like a collapsed antenna. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder and waited for her name. It did not come. Connor, the team leader, was reading assignments from a laminated chart held between his gloved fingers. His voice was low and even, clipped in the way people talked when they didn't need feedback. He handed off maps to Luis and nodded toward the approach routes. Sarah took a sealed med kit and started checking packs without a word. Milo leaned against the side of the truck, sipping instant coffee from a dented thermal mug, occasionally raising his eyebrows in mock approval as Connor spoke. Nobody spoke to Rachel. She wasn't holding a rifle. She wasn't part of the plan. Later, during the route overview, she was told to stay fluid with the tail element. The phrasing was deliberate, like a courtesy masking the obvious. Stay out of the way. Record what's useful. Try not to fall behind. She nodded once and made a quiet note on her wrist slate. Her handwriting was small, just block letters in wind direction. No one asked what she had written. By late afternoon, most of the team was tightening straps, finalizing comm checks, and re-zeroing optics. Rachel took her seat on a storage crate and adjusted the exposure settings on her primary lens. The mountain light at this time of year had a tendency to flatten, contrast, past elevation 0.4000. She accounted for that with 2 polarizing filters and a recalibrated sensor grid. No one noticed. Milo passed behind her with a fresh sling of gear, muttering as he went. Battery Girl's got her tech dialed in. The way he said it sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. Connor reviewed the mission briefing one last time, speaking into a cracked field tablet. He made no mention of Rachel's role, only gestured vaguely toward the logistics section. She nodded again, this time without even being seen. That evening, as the team gathered for their pre-mission meal, the sun dropped behind the far ridge. A propane heater clicked quietly near the foot of the tent. Dinner was a stack of ration packs and half a tub of peanut butter passed around in silence. Milo broke that silence the same way he always did, with his voice just loud enough to carry. He nudged the side of Rachel's case with his boot and grinned. "So if we get ambushed, you gonna shoot back with your battery pack?" Sarah looked up briefly. Luis glanced toward the tent flap. Connor didn't respond. Rachel didn't either. She picked up the case, nodded politely, and left without comment. The sound of laughter followed her halfway across the gravel lot. Inside her personal gear tent, she unclipped the tripod and wiped a streak of grit from one of the joints. Her hands moved carefully, methodically. She unscrewed the camera mount and replaced it with a broken M4 rifle bracket she'd found in the overflow crate near the tool shelter. The lock mechanism was jammed, but she loosened it with a bit of graphite and finger pressure. The rifle mount clicked into place not perfectly, but close enough. She crouched, adjusted the height, and pressed her cheek lightly where the camera viewfinder usually sat. It was the wrong weight, the wrong shape, but the motion was familiar. Years ago, before her job title was ever tied to a camera, her father had taught her how to steady breath through the scope of a hunting rifle. Back then, the weight made her shoulder ache. Now it felt almost natural. That part of her life was over. It had to be. She adjusted the tripod slightly to account for slope, tested its rotation tension, and then took it all apart again. She stayed that way for a minute, breathing slowly through her nose. Then she reattached the camera rig, resealed the case, and packed everything away. The cold seeped through the floor as she sat cross-legged beside the pile of gear. She pulled out her notebook, one with waterproof paper and a red grid overlay, and began sketching light angles for the next morning's footage. In the corner of the page, she drew a small arc of elevation math. Not one person would see it, but she needed it to be precise. Outside, the mountains had gone quiet again. Not wrong, just waiting. The fog came in thin ribbons first, winding between the trees like breath from something unseen. As the recon team pushed higher into the ridgeline, the light flattened into dull gray bands. The trail beneath their boots shifted from packed dirt to loose gravel, then to thin crusts of snow clinging to broken stone. Wind funneled between the rock faces, slicing through seams in gloves and jacket collars. No one spoke unless necessary. Rachel stayed in step. She kept near the back, half a pace behind Luis and 3 behind Connor. Her pack carried less weight than theirs, but it made up for it in bulk lenses, data modules, and vibration-stabilized audio rigs. Even so, her footing was sure. She used the toe edge of each boot for grip and leaned with the incline like she'd done this before. No one commented. Maybe they assumed she was lucky. During a short rest by a wind-sheltered outcrop, she knelt to adjust her camera for the shifting light. The fog had turned denser in the last 15 minutes, scattering refraction in ways that could ruin every shot. She swapped filters, recalibrated ISO bias, then extended the rear sensor array by 2 clicks. Luis watched her for a moment from behind a thermal canteen. His voice was low when he finally asked, "You always shoot with that much correction?" Rachel didn't look up. If I didn't, the image would warp by 3 degrees over 100.0 meters. She paused, then added, "Same math as a wind call, just different hardware." Luis gave a soft grunt of recognition but said nothing else. Milo, crouched nearby, peeling open a meal bar, snorted. "You two swapping sniper codes or lens tricks?" Rachel glanced toward the skyline, then back to the viewfinder. Depends who's watching. The sky was beginning to layer in from the southwest, thin bands of slate-colored cloud forming at just the right altitude to mean trouble. Rachel studied the edges, noting how they dragged slightly to the east. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a paracord wind flag she'd rigged from old pack scraps. It fluttered once, then stiffened toward the drop-off below. Later, when the gusts hit harder and the clouds dropped fast enough to bury visibility, Milo muttered that he should have listened when the camera girl started tracking clouds. No one laughed this time. As the day stretched into colder light, they reached a plateau, lined with narrow sightlines and partial cover. Connor called for another stop, directing the team to hydrate and check their bearings, while Sarah took notes near the satellite tablet. Rachel stepped quietly to a flat rock near the ledge. She reached into her pack and pulled out a strip of white chalk, then marked a short arc on the stone surface 5-degree increments, quartered, just wide enough to bracket. Luis watched from a distance. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. Rachel recorded 5 angles of the valley below, measuring light exposure by hand, then sketched a terrain gradient into her notebook. Her fingers were cold, but her lines were clean. She traced a short triangle on the far page and labeled the hypotenuse with estimated wind drag. It was an old habit, one her father had taught her years ago. He had raised her on ranges, taught her to feel the shot before she ever saw it. Her brother had followed the same path, but he had gone further into the military, into war, into something he never came back from. Rachel never joined. Not officially. She had taken a different road, one her parents could survive. Now, she stood near the edge of a ridgeline, camera in hand, notebook in her pocket, and no one questioned her place. Not because they accepted her, but because they had stopped noticing. That suited her just fine. Sarah passed by with a quiet nod, offering a water pouch. Rachel accepted it without a word. The silence between them wasn't unfriendly, just tired. By the time they moved again, the light had turned blue and the wind had picked up. Connor signaled a shift in route based on terrain density. Rachel logged the adjustment, recalculated the angle of descent, and kept walking. She never stumbled, never lagged behind. She just watched and saw. The fog had thickened into something closer to wet smoke. It moved low across the ridge and settled like a second skin over everything the team touched. On the fifth morning, Rachel woke to the sound of sleet pinging gently against the tension lines of her tent. It wasn't loud, just steady. A sound that said the world outside was colder and heavier than when they had zipped their bags the night before. They camped near a narrow ledge on the southern face, where a series of ridgeline terraces allowed limited visibility, but offered some shelter from crosswinds. The plan was to hold there for 12 hours, log terrain visuals, and observe potential movement through the saddle pass, 1 kilometer west. Connor directed Luis and Sarah toward the northeast approach while Milo handled a relay line check. Rachel was assigned to document weather conditions and general topography from the southern ledge. No one followed. She climbed carefully, fingers numb inside her gloves as she tested each hold for ice. Her tripod was strapped tight to her back, camera secured in front. She breathed through her mouth to keep her goggles from fogging. Halfway up, the fog opened just enough to reveal a short overhang, a perfect spot for high-angle observation. She settled there, unpacking the tripod with quiet efficiency, securing 2 legs into the ice crust and the third against a flat stone base. As she clipped in the camera, the wind dropped. For a moment, there was only the sound of breath, sleet, and silence. Then she saw movement. Through the lens, blurred at first, came the outline of 3 figures low, purposeful shapes emerging from the trees below the western saddle. Not part of the team. No standard gear. No call-outs. Just smooth, tactical motion. She adjusted the focus and zoomed. There were 4 of them. 1 lagging behind. 1 carrying something long across his back. She steadied the view. Her gloved finger twisted the focus ring. The figure lifted the object from his shoulder. It was an RPG. Her pulse spiked. She keyed her radio and whispered the call sign. Static. She adjusted her gain and tried again. Nothing but white noise. The terrain interference was worse than expected at this elevation. She tried the alternate band. Still nothing. Through the camera, she could now see clearly. The enemy soldier was crouching near a bend in the ridgeline that gave him a direct shot toward the recon team's resting position. He was lining up, slow, methodical. Rachel adjusted her angle and braced the camera against the wind. Her breath shook as she reached for the secondary mic rig to signal with sound pulses, but even that would be too slow. The shot would hit before the team ever saw him. She scanned the slope beside her and saw a half-covered crate wedged under an old tarp. The lid was broken. Inside was a mess of bent tools, burned cables, and something long and blackened with heat. An M4 rifle, scarred and half disassembled. Its forward grip was cracked. The stock looked warped, but the upper receiver was intact. Rachel stared at it for a second too long. She pulled it free. The action stuck. She cleared it with a soft nudge, wiped the firing pin with her lens cloth, and slotted in the old magazine still taped to the side. She did not remember picking it up. Her hands moved without her. The tripod was still open. She stripped the camera from the mount and set it aside. The M4 settled awkwardly into place. It didn't lock clean, but it balanced. She adjusted the angle. Her hands trembled. Her father's voice rose up from memory. Flat. Calm. Certain. Breath steady. Wind left to right. Trust your first sightline. Aim to stop, not to destroy. The soldier with the RPG was now 30 meters from the edge of the overlook. One shot would give him full line of fire. One squeeze and the team would never make it off this mountain. Rachel settled her shoulder against her pack, using it as a brace. The tripod shifted slightly under the strain. She corrected. Her breath slowed. She did not want to do this. She aligned the sights, calculated for drop, angle, wind shear, and distance. The fog distorted the field, but she knew how to read edges. The shot would need to hit center mass. Clean. The barrel wavered once, then held. Her finger hovered. You never shoot to end something. You shoot to protect something. The words weren't dramatic in her head. They were method, rhythm, like breathing. The man below stepped forward, lowering one knee to stabilize the launcher. Rachel blinked once. She squeezed the trigger. The report cracked through the ridge like a snapped tree. The shot hit the target square in the chest. He pitched backward. The launcher clattered to the side, sliding down the hill into the brush. Confusion erupted among the other figures. One dropped to the ground. Another scrambled for cover. None of them knew where the shot had come from. Down below, the recon team heard it too. Milo shouted over the radio. Connor's voice cut through with sudden urgency. Sarah confirmed enemy presence. Return fire echoed up the slope, but the angle was wrong. They didn't know who had fired first, only that it had bought them time. Rachel ducked low, pulled the M4 from the tripod, and tucked it back into the crate. Her chest felt hollow. Her ears rang. Her gloves were slick with sweat. She reached for the lens cloth, wiped the grip clean, then wrapped the weapon again in the old tarp. She did not stay to watch the aftermath. By the time she reached the base of the overlook, the sleet had turned to rain. Her hood stuck slightly to the back of her neck. Her heartbeat had slowed to something normal, but her hands had not stopped shaking. She said nothing when she rejoined the group. She nodded at Connor's silent signal. She took a knee beside Sarah, as if nothing had happened. No one asked. The wind shifted just after the shot. It moved east, dragging the sleet with it, pulling the sound out of the ridge like breath leaving a lung. Rachel didn't move. Her hand still rested near the tripod. Fingers curled slightly as if holding onto the trigger long after it had released. The M4 lay to her left, its weight now inert. Her camera continued recording. Lens aimed at the empty field where the figures had disappeared. The hillside below had gone still. She crouched beside the crate and exhaled slowly. Her breath formed a short cloud before vanishing into the thin air. Her jaw trembled. Her eyes burned. She reached up and pulled back her hood, letting the cold settle against her scalp. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled once, wings cutting a clean line through the mist. Rachel looked at the rifle again. It wasn't broken anymore. It had done what it was meant to do. That was the part she hadn't prepared for. She had expected rust, misfire, something flawed to absolve her from the decision, but the weapon had worked. Cleanly. Perfectly. She wiped the grip again with her lens cloth, folded the M4 back into the tarp, and lowered it into the crate. One bullet gone, one cartridge tucked into her coat pocket, not as a trophy, just so she wouldn't forget. "I didn't want to," she whispered. Her voice was flat. It sounded like someone else had said it. She stayed on the ridge a moment longer, then shut off the camera, collapsed the tripod, and shouldered her gear. Her legs felt heavier with every step, not from the slope, but from the gravity of what had passed. She followed the same track back down, leaving no sign she had ever been there. By the time she made it back to the camp perimeter, the clouds had lifted slightly. The wind wasn't as sharp. Sarah was crouched near a tree root, tending to Luis's arm. A strip of gauze and a tension wrap covered a deep graze, but he was talking, alert, eyes focused. Connor was pacing slowly near the comm antenna, speaking in clipped bursts into the backup channel. Milo leaned against a rock, boots crossed at the ankle, chewing a strip of jerky. She approached quietly. No one looked up until she was nearly beside them. Connor gave a curt nod, nothing more. Sarah offered a half smile, her eyes tired but kind. Milo raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, someone up there dropped an angel shot." He tapped the side of his helmet, snapped the guy clean out of position before he could fire. Right before the ridge lit up. Must have been a lucky outlier. Rachel didn't answer. She eased her pack off and sat near the edge of the camp zone. Her fingers felt stiff, not from cold, but from something she couldn't shake. The others resumed their tasks. No one asked where she had been. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay curled in her thermal liner, watching the soft glow of her watch flick by in slow minute increments. Every sound outside felt magnified footsteps, radio static, the wind brushing tent fabric. Just before 3, she unzipped her bag, pulled out the backup camera module, and slid on her headset. The footage loaded quickly. She skipped to the segment time-stamped at the peak of the ridge. There was the image her hands, moving out of frame, the camera jostling as it was set aside, the blurred moment where the M4 was lifted. The audio had captured her breath, low and steady. Then the shot, the shape in the distance folding backward, the weapon spinning away. She watched it once, then again. She paused at the frame where the rifle muzzle broke the mist. She did not speak. Then she deleted it. She pressed down hard on the confirm button, holding it longer than necessary. When the module cleared, she shut it off and returned it to her case. She didn't cry. That would have felt dishonest. What she felt wasn't grief. It was weight, like an old coat someone had handed back without asking. Not punishment, not pride, just something that fit too well after all this time. Outside, the clouds had thinned enough for moonlight to find the trees. Her fingers drifted to the coat pocket. The cartridge case was still there, warm from body heat. She would not tell them. Not tomorrow, not ever. Some things were meant to be done without applause. Some acts left no signature, only consequence. And sometimes, doing the right thing felt a lot like being alone. The helicopters came at dusk, their blades drawing wide arcs through the smoky mountain air. The recon team loaded in silence. No one spoke during the flight back to base. They were tired. 2 of them had minor wounds. All of them were thinking about what almost happened. But no one could explain how the tide had turned when it did. One moment they were pinned. The next, the enemy line had broken. No overwatch had been assigned. No allied units had been nearby. Back on the tarmac, after debrief and medical checks, Rachel packed her camera equipment with practiced hands. She moved slower than usual, each motion deliberate. Her lenses were sealed, her backups stored. She didn't review the combat segment. She didn't have to. The others filtered out. Milo made a comment to no one in particular about divine timing. Connor scrolled through the comm logs, frowning at the gaps. Sarah glanced across the prep bay, her gaze resting on Rachel for just a moment longer than usual. No one said anything out loud. Luis stayed behind. He had gone back up the ridge before boarding, claiming he left a rangefinder. What he found instead was a spent casing lodged beside a rock, half buried under sleet. He turned it in his palm once, then looked around. No footprints, no signature. But something scratched into the old M4 mount left beside the crate caught his eye. 3 letters. Rachel's initials. Faint. Like a habit. The kind of mark someone leaves without realizing they've done it. That night, after lights out, he folded a small note and slipped it into the side pouch of Rachel's gear pack. No signature. Just 7 words. Your wind call saved 6 lives. Respect. Rachel found it the next morning. She didn't show anyone. She didn't speak of it. She folded the note twice and tucked it inside the lining of her optics pouch, next to the spent cartridge. Later that week, Luis passed her in the hallway near the comm lab. He didn't stop, didn't smile, just nodded once quick, flat, unmistakable. A soldier's nod, not just of thanks, but of recognition. That was all, and it was enough. Inside the comm room, Rachel watched the untouched footage. The shot wasn't on it, only the aftermath. The fog clearing, the ridge silent, the place where it happened now just part of the terrain. She paused the video and stared at the frame. No movement, just the still outline of rocks, wind-pressed trees, and cloud-stained sky. She closed the file, then opened the backup camera's metadata log. She scrubbed the last 4 entries, erased the embedded timestamp. The only record of what had happened was now folded in cloth, sealed inside her bag. No one would find it. That choice was hers. She stepped outside as the light shifted through cloud again. The wind was picking up from the east. Her body leaned slightly into it, as if expecting something to resist. She adjusted her shoulder strap and kept walking. She had footage to catalog, a report to draft, and gear to recondition. Routine work, but her movements were quieter now, not slower, just more careful. The mission was over, but the weight of that ridge had not lifted, and maybe it never would. That night, Rachel didn't join the others for mess. She stayed in her bunk, adjusting the alignment settings on her gimbal mount. Her fingers were steady now. The camera sat beside her, humming in standby. She paused to look at the case. It still had faint scratches near the hinge, from where the tripod had buckled on the slope. She ran her thumb across them once, then let her hand fall. Across the base, the team's mission summary was entered into official record. It mentioned difficult conditions, terrain challenges, enemy movement, no mention of a mystery shot, just a footnote on a recovered crate and an outdated rifle marked inoperative. Rachel never corrected it. Some stories end without ceremony. Some lives are saved without a witness. And some truths are kept not out of shame, but because they belong to the one who carried them alone. She checked the ridge photo one last time, then powered the system down. In the quiet, she rested her hand over her optics pouch. That was all the proof she needed. Rachel's name never made it into the report. The file was stamped, archived, and reviewed without mention of her role. Officially, the ridge shot came from an unknown overwatch. The after-action logs listed it as external disruption, unidentified origin. The footage she submitted was clean. No trace of the moment, no rifle, no sound of the trigger. But someone in intelligence watched the full set. Quietly. No clearance tags. No direct report, just a clipped reference from a ground-level analyst working overnight review. One still frame stood out. It was blurry at the edges, caught from the backup lens at a strange angle. A woman, on a ridge, kneeling beside a tripod, an M4 resting against her thigh, her face turned away, her shadow falling into fog. The image was shared quietly, a few emails, then a secure message thread, then a closed-loop forum for reconnaissance footage. No one knew her name. The caption under the still read, "Sometimes the shot that saves you is never reported." It spread farther than anyone expected. Rachel never acknowledged it. She kept working. She rebuilt her equipment setup, checked sensors, calibrated compass modules. The only change was how others looked at her, not with praise, just with a slower kind of attention, like they had started to see something they had missed the first time. She received no medal, no citation, but 2 weeks later, a courier dropped a package at the gear bay. No return address. Inside were 2 folded letters, one from a woman named Lauren, whose husband had been on that ridge, the other written in crayon, signed only as Katie. Lauren's letter was formal, with careful lines and practiced gratitude. She wrote about watching her husband walk through their front door, holding their youngest child. She wrote about the difference between a folded flag and a living man. And she wrote, without question, that someone had made that difference. Katie's note was simpler. "Thank you for saving my dad. He says you were very brave. I drew you a hawk because he said you were watching from the sky." Rachel read both letters in silence. Then she placed them side by side in her hard case, right beside her lens cloth and the paracord wind flag. She smoothed them flat. She did not fold them again. Later that night, she sent a message to her mother. Short. Only one line. "I didn't fail him. I used it." The reply came back almost instantly. You were always stronger than both of them. The next morning, Rachel stepped off a transport shuttle at a new forward base. Different region, different terrain, same work. She moved with her pack slung low, her case secure at her side. The tripod now bore a scratch across the hinge arm, one she had not repaired. The optics case had a new mark carved lightly into the interior foam. 400-meter ridge. She had done it with a survey knife. No one would see it unless they opened the case carefully. And no one ever did. She took her place on the field perimeter, waiting for morning light. When the time came, she unfolded the tripod, checked the slope angle, and set her shoulder against the brace. The camera aligned cleanly. No shake. She adjusted exposure and held her breath while the light shifted. There was no rifle this time. Just her, the tripod, and the wide silence of the earth waiting to be seen. She opened the side flap of her case and pulled out a folded range card. It wasn't standard issue. It was hand-drawn, the one she had used to measure that slope in the mountains. Wind notes, elevation sketches. It meant nothing to anyone else, but it had marked the beginning of the moment she became someone else. Rachel tucked the card behind the lens mat and looked through the viewfinder. Her breath steadied. No one would write about her. No one would say her name aloud in the halls. But somewhere, 3 children still had a father because of what she had done. Somewhere, a woman still had a partner. And somewhere, deep in classified channels, an image moved silently through the ranks. A woman on a ridge, face turned away, camera steady. That was all the world needed to know. And everything she would ever carry. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who never asks to be seen. Rachel never signed up to be a hero. She carried no weapon, wore no rank that granted her authority, and never raised her voice. But when the moment came, she acted not for glory, but because no one else could. Her story reminds us that worth is not measured by titles or medals, but by the quiet choices made when no one is watching. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes, it moves through silence, leaves no name behind, and still changes everything. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or unseen, let Rachel's story remind you that your presence matters. The way you carry yourself, even in silence, holds more power than you realize. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more true moments of quiet strength.